So after the heavy ethical bit, now we're getting on to the slightly less heavy climate changey bit, where we go and talk about something slightly more, light and easygoing. So this is we'll get into how this all relates to tech in a little bit, but this is a picture of Hurricane Maria. This is September 2017. This is actually the second hurricane to hit Puerto Rico in several weeks. It devastated the island. Hang on, my clicker is now not working. There we go, now it's working. It devastated the island, it destroyed homes, it did a huge amount of damage, it just took away livelihoods, it destroyed a huge amount of buildings across the island. And it caused roughly the third largest amount of damage of any event in American history. And it was just one small island, which is not actually a state. It has no real kind of power. It couldn't really do anything and is still recovering at this moment. It's just an enormous amount of devastation that was caused. And this is just something that we have come to kind of think as normal now, but it's not normal. It is actually something that is new. It's just these extreme weather events are becoming so much more seen, so much more painful. But they are the new normal. They are what we are seeing. They are what climate change has created in our world. But there are companies that are out there and they're going, actually, we are recognizing this, we are seeing that this is something that's happening. And this is one of the companies in Puerto Rico that actually looked at this and went, okay, this is something we need to do something about. And this company, Mylan, they got in a company, an insurance company, and they assessed their company and said, actually, we think climate change is a risk. Thank you very much. We think climate change is a risk that we need to do something with. So they got this company in, they said, what should we do? And the company came in, and for a few million quid, a few $1 million, they went and they strengthened their roof. And so when the hurricanes hit, their roof was completely fine. Their building was completely fine. All the buildings around them were just devastated, but their building was absolutely fine. They basically had assessed their building for climate risk, and they did something about it. And they were able to keep going. Their pharmaceutical business was absolutely mostly unaffected. Their workers were completely stuffed, but they were fine. And they could keep their business going, and they could actually support their staff. They could support their workers. They could actually provide a livelihood, which a lot of other businesses couldn't. And this is one of the things that actually comes out, which is that climate change is actually a huge business risk. It's a massive business risk, in fact. Most people don't actually think about it like that. They just think about it as the fact that actually in like 50 years' time we're all going to fry. But that's what most people think about it as. And, some point some politician's going to fix it, and the UN's going to come along and with a magic wand go, woohoo, and all of the politicians of the world are going to fix this whole problem. But actually The Economist and various other organisations and newspapers are actually telling us now that it is actually a business problem. It's actually something that businesses need to do something about. It's a threat to companies. It's a threat to their bottom lines. It's not just about, it's just about, water levels rising, and it's just about, occasionally there's going to be some of the deserts are going to encroach on various bits of areas of the world that we don't go to. That's not actually it. It's actually going to start affecting businesses' bottom lines. And that's why we as business people and people who understand and work in large businesses or small businesses or actually are part of economies that actually are affected by this are actually going to find these things more and more a part of our conversation. But how does that actually relate to technology? Is this a technology conversation? Why am I even standing here and having this conversation with you? Otherwise this would be a very short talk if it was nothing to do with technology, so it probably is something to do with it. So a little bit about me. I am an experienced CTO. I may look very young, but I am still an experienced CTO. Well, I think I look young. You're supposed to laugh at that point. Okay. That was a pity laugh is fine as well. I'm also a serverless consultant. I spend my time, I ran a serverless startup for a couple of years before anyone knew of the word serverless. I was also the former AWS senior developer advocate for serverless. I'm an environmentalist. I am also on Twitter and Medium there, and I'm also the co-founder of something called Serverless Days, which there's going to be roughly 20 serverless days this year. I'm going to be running one in London. It was formerly called JeffConf. Ask me later why. It's a good conversation. And when we start to talk about climate change, when we talk about all of those things, we often get a conversation about personal choices. It's all right, I'm doing my thing. I am, I recycle. I put all the right things in the right bins. I don't drive my car. I use various, the right forms of transport. Well, actually, they've done some research to find out what the impacts of certain things are. And there are good things and bad things. This was from 2017. And there are some low impact and high impact things. And some of them are actually good and some of them are not. The low impact things are things like recycling. Recycling is actually not a particularly high impact thing in terms of your carbon footprint. High impact things are things you may not think about, like buying green energy or going vegetarian. I am actually a vegetarian. I do it purely for climate change reasons. Eating meat is a bad thing if you want to lower your carbon footprint, believe it or not. Far, far better to eat less meat than to recycle. Who knew? And also avoiding flying. We work in tech. Tech is a ridiculously bad industry in terms of flying. We fly people everywhere and we go to amazing conferences in amazing places, but there's like 4,000 of us in one place. And we all flew there because you can't get to Vegas without flying. And then it turned into being 40,000 people in one place, and it's still in Vegas. And we've all gone there, and it's absolutely ridiculous. If you imagine the carbon footprint of these conferences, and then you start to think, we work in tech, we should be doing better than this. And I also have my personal choices. I realise that these things actually don't make that much of an impact. And so I joined a local organisation to where I live in a place called Wolverton in Milton Keynes. And it's a community energy company. This community energy company has about 300 kilowatts of solar panels. And it's a community benefit society. I don't get paid for this. This is essentially a voluntary role. But we have a whole bunch of solar panels on roofs, which you can see on the right-hand side and on the left. And any profits we make get put back into the local community. So this is really good. I think the last count we had something like we had saved about 130 million cups of tea in terms of the amount of electricity we had saved by putting these solar panels on the roofs. So actually that, if you can imagine, I will never drink 130 million cups of tea, so in terms of the amount of water boiled, so I'm having much more of an impact doing something like this than I would have done if I was just going to be recycling for the rest of my life. So I kind of have realised that there are a whole load of personal choices and then bigger choices that you can make. And this led me into a bit of an exploration into the world of tech and how the world of tech can have more of an impact. And I was like, actually, how much of an impact does the tech industry have? So let's talk a little bit about tech, electricity and emissions. So most people in tech are completely unaware and disempowered when talking about climate change. I have had huge numbers of conversations about this over the last few years, and there are people that don't think that tech has anything to do with climate change, and I mean anything. Problem is, we have a huge amount, and I mean an enormous amount to do with climate change. Within 10 years, it's reckoned that internet-connected devices could produce roughly 14 14% by 2040, but 3.5% within 10 years of global emissions. Let's just let that one sink in a little bit. Okay, roughly at the moment, we're about the same as aviation as an industry in terms of data centers. Okay? So the amount of carbon emissions, the amount of global emissions that the tech industry puts out just from data centers is the same as aviation. Okay? Just, that doesn't feel right. But it appears to be roughly right. And it's difficult to make it work. It's difficult to make the numbers work because we actually don't know how much electricity quite a lot of data centers put out, including the cloud. But there are rough guesses that we can make, but it's approximately, the information that we have is approximately that. And also, in terms of the ICT industry, could use 20% of all electricity by 2025. That's the whole industry, which is 5.5% of all carbon emissions, they reckon. That's 6 years away. So tech has an enormous, enormous role to play. And just so we're clear, the next person that tells me that we can make more efficient data centers is just kidding themselves. Any efficiency gains are being eaten up by demand, and it's very much an upward trajectory. Now, upward trajectories are quite fun. This is AWS. This is AWS's growth over the last few years. Basically, if they'd gone, you know, we're getting more and more efficient, then basically everyone would have gone, yes, well done, you're getting more efficient, but we're using more and more and more of you. This is called Jevons Paradox, and if you've never come across Jevons Paradox, it's very, very simple. Basically, increased efficiency means you want to use more of it. And if you use more of it, you actually increase the demand for that thing. So basically, making something more efficient, which is what you do with cloud, pressing a button, using more of it, you just increase the demand for that item. And what we've done with tech is we're pretty good at making things more efficient. In fact, that's pretty much what we live for. So what we've got is this wonderful thing where efficiency doesn't actually save us. So things like the Internet of Things, where we're trying to make, you know, our world more efficient, is actually making our world less efficient, and producing greater carbon emissions and all of those things. And then you get into the fun things around some of the cool new things we do in technology, like Bitcoin. Now, has anyone ever seen this graph? There's one person nodding, which is fantastic, because most of you won't have seen this graph. It's the assumed Bitcoin energy consumption index. Now, Bitcoin is one of those lovely things that people who are in it will basically tell you it's the most amazing thing in the world, and those who are outside of it are going, what planet do you live on? Unfortunately, they live on the same planet as us, and they're using this much electricity, which is roughly the same as Singapore every single day. And when you say, oh, what? That's because they're doing Bitcoin mining, and Bitcoin mining is incredibly energy intensive because it's essentially a lottery every single day and every single 10 minutes to try and win a Bitcoin. Now, it sounds crazy, it's a little bit crazy, and then you end up with this, which is that the estimated carbon footprint per Bitcoin transaction is 192.93 kilograms of CO2, which is about the same as a VW Golf driving from London to Edinburgh and back. That's one Bitcoin transaction. Now tell me it's a good thing. Now tell me it's the future of fintech. Good grief. Anyway, data centers, coming back to data centers. So, anyway, that was just an aside for everybody out there who loves Bitcoin. I'm very sorry, I've killed it for you. So data centers, one of the things about data centers, we'll get back to data centers and electricity. Data centers are 24/7. And because they're 24/7, they're actually a really interesting growth part of the energy market. The interesting thing about the energy market is there are a lot of efficiencies to be gained, and there are a lot of people who are trying to reduce the use of energy, and there are a lot of people who are trying to, organizations and governments who are trying to reduce the amount of electricity we use. Data centers, we're building more of those. And the interesting thing is that cloud and data centers do an incredibly good job of abstracting something, and that's the impact of our usage on emissions. So we don't have anything like this. For example, we don't know what our cloud carbon footprint is. So if you started an instance, for example, of a type L3 on a completely random, completely unknown cloud that I've created off the top of my head, you wouldn't get a carbon released 6 grams of CO2 equivalent per hour, or whatever. You wouldn't have that, because who would know? How would you know? And could you find out your cloud carbon footprint? Would you even know where to look? Just out of interest, does anyone know whether their cloud is green or not? One person, 2 people.
I know it's not.
Excellent. That's depressing. Anyway, we don't know. Most people don't know. Most people aren't looking. Most people aren't even thinking about these things. And the thing is that these are business risks. These are things that we need to think about as business people, as technologists, and a little bit of the previous talk, a little bit of bringing up the conversations that we were previously having. Yes, these are things we should be talking about. Yes, these are things we should be going. Actually, I think we should have this conversation. I think we should be stopping and going, I think we should be thinking about these things with our bosses, with our managers, with our teams. And it's not just me saying these things. I'd like to point that out. I'm not just a lone wolf standing around going, yes, we need to talk about climate change, tech people. People like Forrester and others are doing it as well. And they're talking about lots of things like shifting weather patterns and all of that. But there are also other things, like there's reputational risks. If you don't start doing this, at some point someone's going to turn around and, when we start to have real problems with our weather, which is, several years ago, people are going to start to ask you the questions around, so what are you doing as an organisation about this? And it's not going to just be, well, we recycle a lot, which is what most people do. We have the right bins in the corridors so that we make sure that we can split everything into recycling and waste. It's actually going to be much more about, actually, we've got our cloud in the right thing. We have moved everything over to a green cloud. There's also financial risks. Just thinking about this, at some point, the world is going to have to move over to a sustainable electricity supply, because either the oil is going to run out, or we're going to have massive wars over the oil, or we're going to have wars over the oil at some point, maybe in like 10 or 15 years, but it's going to happen. Or we're going to have something that's going to cause the price of oil to be incredibly high, and that could be carbon pricing, it could be an awful lot of things around that, or it could be the fact that actually we just say we're not going to get any more oil out of the ground. At which point we need to do something like nuclear, which is going to cost an awful lot of money, or we're going to have to get a lot more renewables. It's going to cost an awful lot of money. Our prices are going to go up. And so if we're already on renewables, then we're going to be at the point where we're going, excellent, well, I'm not going to have to move because I've already done it. Costs are still going to go up, but we may be able to hedge our bets and be able to buy the electricity over a long period of time. This would be a good thing. And also there's operational risks in terms of, where are your data centers? Do you know where your data centers are? Are they in places where they may get flooded? If you're in the cloud, just have you asked your cloud provider where your data centers are? They're not going to tell you, but can you ask them what their climate risk is? That'll be an interesting question to ask them. Also, things like physical risks. Talking about Puerto Rico, do you know that whether their data centers are in a place where there are hurricanes, and what the buildings are like? Also, some of the countries will be better at regulatory and will be moving faster on regulation, and will be thinking about climate change more than others. And I'm going to point at America at the moment, they may be not doing as much as other countries are. Certainly the EU is pretty good at some of this stuff, and will be thinking about it. So, you've got to think about these things. These are going to be areas that are going to become more and more interesting and more important. And technology matters, whatever the risks. Cloud and data centers are becoming increasingly important. They are actually business critical. This isn't just a kind of, it's just fun to be able to put stuff into the cloud. Moving your cloud and data centers to renewable energy is actually relatively an easy win right now. I'm just about to tell you how. Encouraging your suppliers to do the same is actually a good thing as well, because if you can start to get your energy supply into these areas, it will also start to move the needle on the cloud vendors if they're not there already. So let's just have a bit of a look at the 6 major cloud providers. These are the 6 major cloud providers. My friend Anne Curry and I wrote an ethics white paper last year. We covered these providers simply because these were the ones in the Gartner Magic Quadrant report from 2018. Not that we particularly like that report, it's just that they were the 6 that were there, and we needed to cut it down to a group that we could get to, rather than having 47 to look at. So let's have a quick look. AWS, which is the largest cloud provider. They're relatively secretive about what they do. They have some carbon neutral regions. Did anyone know that AWS has carbon neutral regions? 1 person, 2 people. Did you know that Ireland is a carbon neutral region? You do now? Absolutely. If you put instances into Ireland, you're actually running on 100% what they call sustainable power. So you're actually running green. Everyone go yay. Yay. There we go. That was easy. But anyway, Ireland, Frankfurt, Montreal, Oregon, and the GovCloud in the US are actually carbon neutral regions. So if you have your AWS instances, if you have your compute, if you have your data in those regions, you are essentially going to be sustainable, which is good. They're planning to go 100%, but they have no timescale, which is, as we all know, useless. And reports are that some of the renewable projects that they've done have actually pushed prices up for consumers. Amazon have basically bought long-term power agreements that have been so, good for Amazon that it's meant that the power company have had to push prices up for local people. So it's not necessarily good for society, good for Amazon. And that's not necessarily the best thing in the world. So in terms of an opinion, it's very good marketing to have some sustainable regions, but they're not actually doing a particularly good thing in terms of actually following through on their promise. And they've had this promise for a very long time. You can go carbon neutral to a point, but there are some of their services which are global, such as Route 53. So if you put stuff into Route 53, you cannot be 100% sustainable. So it's a real problem. The thing is, one of their leadership principles is customer obsession, which is brilliant, because it means you can go to them and go, I want you to be 100% sustainable, please, and do it now. And they'll go, ooh, you're a customer, we've got to listen to you. And if everybody does it, this is a really good thing, which is why I go around and tell people to do this. So tell them that you want them to go 100% sustainable, and they will be obliged to at least listen to you. I used to work there. I know what it's like at the other end of those kind of conversations. So please just tell them. But they don't have any public data. They actually don't release information about their cloud and their electricity usage. So we actually don't know how much of their electricity is sustainably powered. It's relatively a guess, which is a real shame. They could be brilliant, they could be not brilliant, we don't know. We wish we did. So Azure, so this is Microsoft, they actually offset a large proportion of their cloud with energy with what are called carbon certificates, which is basically they buy a carbon offset from somewhere else. This is good because it means that actually, who's on Azure? Anything on Azure? Good, brilliant. That's 100% offset. Everyone go, yay!
Yay.
Oh, that was not good enough. Yay!
Yay.
Okay, that's nice. I was told you were loud and boisterous, but no. So anyway, this is good, and Microsoft are actually a very good ethically and responsible company in this context, and as an organisation they're very good at this part of trying to do the right thing. And they're involved in things like the Open Compute project, trying to make data centres more efficient. In terms of an opinion, I'm just rushing through, I've realised the time, so I'm kind of rushing through this a little bit. They're carbon neutral by default, 100%. This is a good thing. So if you're using things like Office 365, 100% carbon neutral. This is positive. This is an organisation that's trying to do the right thing. However, offsetting by carbon certificates is imperfect. It isn't actually necessarily doing what you want it to do. There are a whole load of better ways of doing it that are actually improving the infrastructure of the energy grids and all of those kind of more complex things, but from a straightforward energy to energy use, it's very good. And it's not entirely clear that they're going to improve that position, but it's better than nothing. And they could improve by improving their direct use of electricity in various different ways. So let's have a little bit of a talk about Google. In 2017, they started offsetting 100% of their electricity from their data centers and for their use of electricity. And they are the biggest corporate purchaser of renewable energy in the world. Did anybody know that? One person. I'm feeling like this message is not getting out. We actually love Google on this front. Their stand on renewable energy is amazing. And they have their page in Google Cloud. If you go and have a look at their renewable energy page, and they've got one on there, it explains, the report explains exactly how they offset. And they offset by trying to buy on the half-hourly basis the amount of energy they've just used in their data centers. So they actually try and offset on a half-hourly basis, or as an hourly basis, I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. But they do an amazing job of trying to be a good citizen in their energy networks. Downside is that you end up with a situation where they actually buy a huge amount of energy in places like Denmark and buy energy from a wind farm, which means that the Danish government is now in danger of missing its Paris climate goals. Which is nuts. Anyway, so they do an amazing job and we'd like them to keep working on it and we'd like them to do it, but actually we just think they're doing an amazing job. So we're going to walk past Google and talk about Alibaba. Does anyone use Alibaba Cloud? Oh no, this is not their conversation. Anyway, Alibaba, Chinese. Unfortunately, I'll quickly race through Alibaba. Very little information. They don't really talk about their cloud. They don't really talk about renewables in terms of their cloud, and they don't talk about sourcing electricity, or they didn't when we did the report. And they've got a huge installed base in China, which is where they come from, which has got a very coal-based electricity grid, which means that they're really, as far as we can tell, dirty coal, dirty electricity, which means that they're going to be producing a huge amount of carbon to run those data centers. And unfortunately, because we have no information, we have to assume the worst. So we're going with, unfortunately, probably don't use them if you're bothered about climate change. Oracle. Does anyone have anything within an Oracle data center? Oh, are you all AWS users? Okay, fine. I'll just run through. So, AWS, it's all right, shove everything in Ireland. So Oracle is a proudly green company. They claim high energy efficiency, but actually some regions, including the UK, is 100% renewable, which is good. But currently only 29% of electricity resources are renewable, and goal is 33% by 2020, which is kind of not very good if you look at it compared to the rest of the cloud vendors. And it's a modest goal, but you can actually run some of your workloads in a 100% sustainable way. This is a good thing. So could do better. And IBM, they still exist as a cloud. And they've got a long-standing commitment to to being environmentally friendly, which is good. And they procure 50% of their data center energy from renewable sources, but not all of their energy, of course. And good, strong position. However, again, let's go with could do better, but it's still better than nothing. So overall, almost all, apart from Alibaba that we can see, have invested in some form of renewables or sustainable energy in some way. An estimation is 25 to 40% around the world is powered or offset by renewables. And without independently auditable data, it's very hard to actually know. The Greenpeace Click Clean report they did some more research than we did, and we actually used their data. It's actually incredibly hard to know. But what is renewable is actually what is sustainable is different within each provider as well. So there's a little bit of a problem here, because one of the reports I mentioned earlier talks about there being a 5 times growth in the amount of data and the amount of data going into data centers and into the cloud, which means by 2025 we're going to need a huge amount of new data centers and a huge amount of new servers and a huge amount of new growth to be able to cope with what is coming. And that's because we've got things like artificial intelligence and machine learning and all the services that go along with it and all the things that we're making easy as cloud vendors are giving them to us. You know, all of these new services that we like to use and are really efficient, so Jevons Paradox comes in again. We're doing all of this, making it easy, and we're going to have this massive explosion, but we need to find the energy for it from somewhere. And when we talk about offsetting is quite fun. So you use an amount of electricity and then you buy electricity from somewhere else. So you buy renewable electricity from somewhere else at the same amount. You still use the electricity and you still release the carbon. So you're just not using it somewhere else. So it's still not perfect. You're just kicking the can down the road. We've used that phrase too many times recently, but for other reasons. You're still releasing the greenhouse gases. You're still releasing the emissions. We need to get to the point where we're not just offsetting. It needs to be a fully rounded solution, not just. We need to change the grid, not just work on the assumption that offsetting will work forever. And we need to fix the means of production. And the thing is, it's about us. We are people in tech. We are the people that can talk about us. And we are the people that can talk to AWS and say, we want 100% renewables. We want you to go this way. They will listen. Not only that, we can encourage the big providers to innovate in this space. Believe it or not, the largest companies in the world, the majority of them are tech companies. Why are they not putting the money into this? Because actually this is probably the next big thing. Google are doing an awful lot of this, but Google are actually doing things like putting money into DeepMind to try and improve the efficiency of things like wind farms so that they can get better data better efficiencies out of wind farms so that they can get more energy out of them, which is hilarious because you get more energy out of the wind farms and you use more carbon emissions. So it's quite fun, but it's Google, so they're using the right electricity to do it. So you kind of hope that that's circular and making it work, but you're not entirely certain. So what should you be doing? You should be doing things like assessing your risk from climate change as a business. You should be looking at moving your cloud and your data centers to renewable energy, to renewable servers, to renewable vendors. You should absolutely be doing this. And you should be talking to your suppliers and customers as well. It's not just you, it's everybody else. Because if your suppliers and your customers are in the wrong place, then they should be thinking about this as well. You should be looking at your cloud providers and going, please, will you go sustainable? That is the link to the white paper. I suggest you find that link and go and read it. It's not, perfect writing, but it's 20 pages of Anne and I trying to explain this to everybody in a slightly more long form with a bit more information in there. And we started a pledge as well, but I'll get to that in a minute. And the overall slide that we take from that was a little table which has Google at the top and Alibaba at the bottom, and AWS somewhere in the middle. because we think AWS could do better. And then we want you to sign a pledge, because we want people to actually tell the world that they want to get sustainable servers by 2024, because actually it does take time to switch over to renewable power. It's not a straightforward thing to do. Move their servers, it's not a straightforward thing to do. It's not just flicking an instance over from one thing to another all the time. And so that's the pledge on change.org. It's actually over 1,500 now. I don't know what it is by the end of this evening, hopefully more than that, if you particularly want to get involved. But tell your provider you want them to use renewable energy so you can have sustainable servers by 2024. And I did this talk recently at QCon with a climate scientist, and he has recently started a little charity that plants trees in Greenland. Now, Greenland is that big island on the top of maps that looks huge and all white. Well, it's not all white anymore. It's now got space for trees on it because it's not all white anymore. And so you can actually plant trees there, maybe because of climate change. And so for €40, $35 or so, you can offset a flight from London to San Francisco just by planting trees in Greenland. And the point about planting trees in Greenland is there are very few people there, and very few people means they're not going to get chopped down. So you can just plant a tree there and you can offset your flight. And that's actually an incredibly easy and simple way of doing so. So I would encourage everyone to do it. That's greenlandtrees.org. And climate change is the biggest issue we face as humanity, whatever anyone else says it is. Extreme weather is the new normal, and it's a current and future business risk, whatever anyone says. And we are the first generation to see the effects of climate change firsthand, and probably the last generation who can make a difference. And climate change is our problem as a tech community. And you are no longer unaware, and you are no longer disempowered. And we can make a difference. So let's go and change the world. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Any questions? That was very loud. Go for it.
Just first, this is an example you didn't list because it's not exactly a data center. Facebook about 3 years ago, not my favorite company in the world, they created a data center either in Finland or Sweden, one of the Nordic countries, and it was 100% running renewable energy, just between hydroelectric and geothermal. Just in case you want to mention that sometime. My real question was, I assume you believe it's better for companies as individuals to work with these larger data center providers rather than run them data centers inside the environment, because then you can all just work together.
So you get. So one of the things that's worth saying is that there are huge amounts of efficiencies you gain by going with cloud vendors. So the downside of that is that if you start loads and loads of instances within a cloud vendor, you're just wasting energy, and that you don't look after and all of that kind of stuff. So there's a both and, which is there are efficiencies to be gained by economies of scale, but if you then just use it and don't think about it, then you end up with a different situation, which is just wastage, which is worse. But the thing I would say is that running your own data centers is a massive, complex problem. It's a huge issue. Why anyone would want to do it anyway is probably a completely a huge problem, unless you've got legacy data centers that you have to use and have to run. I would be wondering why anyone would want to be doing it anyway right now, but that's a whole other conversation to be had. In terms of the data centers, there are a large number of data centers that run on hydro, geothermal power in various different places. Iceland has a number of 100% renewable powered data centers, but one or two doesn't really make a difference. And any organisation that's trumpeting these things will, in my book, be accused of greenwashing on a large scale. And it's really difficult. I don't think it's entirely fair sometimes to kind of single an organisation out and go, you should be doing better. But when an organisation, I think like AWS, and I will single them out here because I used to work there, goes for several years going, we are going to go 100%, but does not put a timescale on it, I think that's worth calling out. I think it's worth saying, actually, unless you're going to start going, we're going to go 100% by a time, then don't say it at all, it's not worth it. Any other questions? There must be more. There will be more. Or are you all too... Have you had too much to drink that you can't think of any other questions?
Not enough.
Not enough? Have I really depressed you? Who was...
One more there.
Oh, okay, sorry. Didn't see.
I was just interested, China have been doing a lot of research into solar energy recently, and whole solar city, all that gear, so I'd assume that Alibaba would maybe surely, as they're one of the largest companies in the world, be investing in that kind of stuff themselves. Maybe there's no data about it, but this is obviously your research, maybe you've heard something like that.
So Alibaba, as a company, are literally a marketplace. They don't invest in anything. They literally are a marketplace. No, they're a marketplace. So they invest in their own data centers, but they don't. They are a marketplace, and what they do is what they do. Yeah. Google invests in lots of random things. Google actually invests in renewable energy in lots and lots of different places. Alibaba has a very different way of doing things, but they're based in China, and the problem that they have in China is the electricity grid, and the grid is dirty in terms of the mix within the grid. If the mix there was better, then Alibaba would be better by default. But because it's bad and they're building a huge number of extra coal-fired power stations to add more energy into the mix, then you end up with a situation that's just bad. And unless they try and sort that out, then it's going to get worse. And a lot of this is down to geopolitics, and unless the corporations are put under pressure by the customers, then actually nothing's going to change. And everyone, part of this is that word, disempowered. I think a lot of the time the tech world feels hugely disempowered by, oh, it's nothing to do with me, or I can't do anything about it, it's too big a problem. And actually I always thought it was too big a problem. Who am I can't do anything about it. And actually I was like, right, stuff this, I'm going to stand up and start talking about it. And I've stood up and talked about it to hundreds of people now, and I know tens of companies who have now switched their systems over to various renewable regions and rung up their data center companies and said, where does your energy come from? And actually said, well, we're going to move suppliers unless you start to do this. Do you know what I mean? We've had these conversations now, and actually the impact that's going to have is far greater just because of the conversation that I'm starting to have. And I think we get very easily disillusioned by going, actually, what can I do? And I think that's the wrong question, which is, what can we do? Who can I start talking to try and do something about this? Is actually a far better question. And it's like, I think when you end up with when you start off defeated, I think we're never going to get anywhere. I think we just have to go, right, there is a problem, what can I do about it? Is there anything I can do about it? And if it's even just, we need to start a conversation in my company, and if that's all it is, we should have a goal for doing this by 2024, I think is a very reasonable, I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing for most companies to be able to do, or should be. And I think that's a worthwhile starting point, at least to get going. Does that make sense? I don't know if that was the right answer to the question, but it was a slight rant. Go for it.
So Jevons Paradox.
Oh, lovely. You're gonna
So,
go on.
So if making things more efficient,
Yeah.
so demand increases, Is there something we can do about not falling for it? And maybe going, one, let's not make things more efficient. Two, not increasing demand, but just figuring out how to use less, even though the efficiencies are increasing. If we're aware of it, should we go, dare I say, more serverless?
Yes, you should go more serverless anyway. That's an economic argument. There isn't a huge amount you can do about Jevons Paradox, partly because, in terms of the tech argument, partly because the organizations that are out there, the AWSs of this world, the vendors, are out there trying to make things easier for you. They will do that anyway. They will be out there telling you to do these things because they are better for you. Serverless is actually a really interesting example, simply because you end up, I can't tell you whether it is better from a green point of view, because actually it's incredibly difficult to work out whether it is better from a green point of view, simply because you don't know, because there is no equivalence from one, this X and Y are completely different types of applications. So going serverless is not necessarily, who knows, you just don't know. But it is probably more efficient, and it is probably better for the environment. But you may end up building something that is significantly more efficient and therefore better for your users and therefore gets used a whole lot more. But the economies of scale on the vendor side are probably such that they will be able to make a better fist of the environmental impact and basically improve their environmental impact if everybody went serverless. But you can't guarantee that, and I can't guarantee that, and I don't know. But it is a guess. But I would suggest that that would be the case. But I don't think there is a huge amount you can do about it. What I would say is, it certainly shouldn't stop working on efficiency, but I think what we should stop thinking is that efficiency should save us. I think that is the argument, which is, don't sit there and go, well, we'll just make things more efficient and that will work, because that just won't be the argument. It just won't fly. You know, we will save ourselves by just making our grid more efficient. It's just never going to happen, unfortunately. A lot of people think that's what's going to happen, but it just won't. There was one more, go for it.
Yeah. Are there any more data on demand, where all the extra demand on the data centers is coming from? Do any of the supply, like statistics on who's using it all, or anything that, you know, would indicate how to make things use that capacity less, or is it worth it?
So is your question, how can we use it less, or is there anything to...
Well, I mean, if you don't measure it, you don't know if it's an email, if it's Google search.
So there are statistics out there. So there are various, I've forgotten the name of it. So there's a guy called Chris Adams. I think he's Mr. Chris Adams on Twitter, who is, I think he's doing a year-long fellowship with the Mozilla Foundation on something to do with climate change and technology and all this kind of stuff. He's very good at all of this stuff, but I think he's doing research into this area as part of that. I think he's been releasing some work around this kind of area. But one of the things that's been really fascinating is there is research that tells you how much each Google search will release in terms of carbon emissions, roughly. And it's tiny, but you imagine that and the amount of searches that happen. But bear in mind, Google offsets, so that's okay, sort of. It's not perfect, but you can find that information out. But there's some really interesting things you could do, such as if you're doing analytics, instead of using a relational database, chuck it into something like S3 and use Athena. Simply because you don't need it to be performant at that point, and it would be much, much easier to do, and you're just storing data and you're doing it on demand, and that's a much, much better way of doing things in terms of you're doing it, you don't need to run stuff the whole time, you're just doing stuff in an on-demand way, and you're not running a server the whole time. That's a significantly better way of thinking about your carbon footprint and those kinds of things. So there are ways of considering these things and thinking about them going forwards that are not necessarily the bigger kind of overall everybody picture. Does that make sense? I'm not sure I answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think is you're not paying for a lot of this, so there's no incentive for anyone to stop doing it, right?
The problem is we are paying for it, but we're just not paying for it yet. And the problem is that the problem is we are paying for it. We are.
Just say it, Paul.
Oh, just no, I can't. No, just we're basically taking away the future. We're taking away from the future. We're screwing everybody else. We're using it all up now. It's like we are spending everybody's inheritance right now, and we're going to say, well, it's absolutely fine. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine to all of our kids. And I just want to kind of think about it. By 2100, if we don't really do anything about it and everything gets sorted and it's, we just kind of leave it as it is, and the politicians don't really sort anything out, it'll be about 5 degrees more warmer. 5 degrees, the whole world, roughly, which is pants. And if you think about that, my daughter, who's 5 now, will be 86. That's a real person, will be 86. Now, I'm pretty sure we all know 86-year-olds. Yeah? So I'm just kind of thinking, would an 86-year-old like a 5-degree warmer world? And I'm pretty sure they wouldn't. And I'm pretty sure that I don't want that either. And it's just, I'm kind of sitting there going, what on earth can I do about all of that? And there are a whole bunch of stuff, which is basically like, stop using Bitcoin, stop doing all the stuff around, move all your servers onto stuff that is sustainable, stop using things you don't need to, turn stuff off when you don't need it, recycle, because at least it'll do something, go vegetarian because it'll matter. All of those little things, just do stuff and talk to people about it and care about it and make a difference. But do something, don't do nothing, because doing nothing is basically giving up and making it like you don't care. And sorry if that's a bit mean, but I think it is a bit, the world matters. I think we need to do something more. I think that's where I leave it. Cool. Thank you very much.